It all begins at Ale City, which is humanity's last stand. Fire has engulfed the whole city, and lying all around are the bodies of soldiers who have valiantly fought but lost their lives. One man remains alive, and even though there is no hope, he continues fighting, and this man is our MC, Colin Hall. Even the demon that he is fighting is impressed that he still has the zeal to continue, even though there is no chance he is going to beat him. Because of this, he tells Colin that he is going to grant him the mercy of choosing how he is going to die. Colin watches in horror, wondering if this is how everything is going to end. Apparently, 1 year ago, the demons suddenly began their invasion against humanity, and before everyone knew what was happening, the royal capital had fallen. The commoner soldiers actually fought back, but they didn't stand a chance against monsters who could wield magic. Basically, before the invasion, magic was a privilege that was reserved for nobles with superior bloodlines. They are known as the bloodline supremacist nobles who believe that they are the heroes who would save humanity. However, when the invasion started, they couldn't believe that the magic they so much believed in was nothing more than child's play to the demons. The nobles watched helplessly as their walls were taken down, and their families were torn into shreds. Now that Colin is the last person alive, he wishes that he had gotten his hands on a particular grimoire earlier because things wouldn't have turned out the way they have. The demon continues making fun of him, asking him if he has finally decided on how to die because he is already thinking of ways to do it for him. Suddenly, Colin talks back, telling him that he talks too much, and Colin's sudden change shocks the demon. Deep down, Colin has made the decision to use what he didn't want to use from the very start. Colin gets back on his feet and dashes toward the demon, but he easily blocks his attack. However, Colin is not about to give up as he piles on the attack, forcing the demon to leave an opening. Colin ends up pushing his sword into the demon's chest, forcing him backwards. Since there is no damage, the demon makes fun of Colin, asking him if he thought he could defeat him with mere swordsmanship. Suddenly, a cut appears on his arm, and the demon screams out in pain because he never thought he could be cut by a human. Colin admits that it is impossible to cut a demon by ordinary swordsmanship, but what he is currently using is the forbidden sword that sacrifices soul and life force, which is totally different from normal swordsmanship. Colin confidently dashes toward the demon, and a fierce battle ensues between them. The two exchange sword clashes like a regular training day, but Colin's desperation gives him the edge. He soon notices an opening, which he immediately exploits, and he is able to cut off the demon's arm. He goes after the demon's second arm, but the demon catches his sword this time. The demon smiles at Colin, telling him that the result might have been different if he had launched a surprise attack with the forbidden sword, but it is unfortunate for him that he didn't. Colin watches in dismay as the demon shatters his sword with just his grip before pushing his head with so much force that he is sent flying into the wall. Colin groans in pain and disappointment because even his trump card wasn't enough to defeat the demon. The demon walks over to him, telling him that he doesn't know where he learned the impressive technique from, but he lets him know that it is the end for him. The demon grabs Colin and raises him in the air like he is nothing, while Colin is filled with regret that even with everything, all he could take from the demon was just his right arm. Deep down, Colin is totally shattered, and all he could do was apologize to those who had trusted him to win. The demon cuts his throat and his blood drips down like a river. Surprisingly, his blood touches the weird grimoire, and it is able to activate it. Colin is shocked when he suddenly opens his eyes to see that he is still alive somehow, which is pretty weird. However, he is in a weird place, and suddenly he hears his name, causing him to react frantically. He screams out, asking who is behind him, and to his surprise, he sees the grimoire floating in the air. The grimoire tells Colin that his blood awakened it, and because it sensed his desperation, it assures Colin that it is going to help him return to the past to start everything over. Colin hears this and wastes no time agreeing to it because there is nothing more he wants than the chance to be able to rewrite his misfortunes. Even though he doesn't know what the grimoire's intentions are, Colin doesn't really care. Since Colin is on board, the grimoire assures him that it is going to stay by his side from that moment forward, so he can help him master his magic. The grimoire opens and hits Colin with a bright light, while telling him to step into another future. The moment Colin opens his eyes in a strange arena, there is a gladiator wearing an ugly mask. The gladiator known as the Butcher wields a giant mallet, and his theatrics keep the crowd raving in their seats. Colin looks around and realizes that he is in a slave arena. He is also holding a sword and shield, but as he slowly takes everything in, he realizes where he is. The Butcher swings his mallet at him, but he tanks it, and the crowd, including the nobles, go wild. One of the nobles turns to a supposedly important noble, Viscount Slaith, about how good the fight is. Slaith evilly says it is the role of the commoners to be slaves because they are there to entertain them. Just then, the Butcher makes another move, raising his mallet so high so as to completely crush Colin without leaving a crumb. The Butcher's weapon hits, leaving a massive impact on the ground, and the crowd almost loses their minds from this. Butcher's name echoes through the arena, but by the time everything settles down, they are shocked that Colin is still alive, and he is confidently stepping on the Butcher's weapon just to ore a farm. At this point, Colin has taken in everything and realizes that he's returned to the past. This was a time when he was forced to fight as a slave gladiator, and since he can sense everything, he figures out that the grimoire has fused with his body. Since it has come to this, Colin decides that starting from that moment forward, it is time to change everything. He lunges toward the butcher, and with a single powerful slash, he relieves the dude of his head. Colin uses the butcher as his first stepping stone to change the future where humanity was destroyed by the demons. He figures out that he has no choice but to master the magic that was recorded in the grimoire. Being strict with himself, he knows that it is wishful thinking to believe that he can change anything when he is nothing but a slave, which is why he has to change his status. Colin stares into the distance to look at a man, Darius Hall, who is the Lord of the Rhine territory. Colin plans to find his way into the Marquis's household as a family member, and this is something he plans to do faster than in his previous life if he is going to have a chance. Before coming into the arena, Colin's master had told him that the commoners had bet their life savings on him to beat the butcher, but he couldn't do this because he couldn't defy the nobles who were betting on the butcher instead. His master begged him to lose because if he didn't, he would be killed. Colin figures out that Slaith is trying to sacrifice him to get on the nobles' good side, but Colin plans to use this to get into the Hall family. Colin arrogantly demands that they bring him another opponent, and at this point, the nobles who followed Slaith's words to bet on the butcher are losing it. They remind Slaith of how much they bet on the game, but Slaith urges them to calm down because what they are witnessing is also part of the plan. Meanwhile, Darius is mesmerized by Colin's strike that took the butcher's head. He asks his trusted butler what he thinks about it, and the man tells him that it is quite phenomenal because even the Empire's greatest warriors can rarely pull off moves like the one Colin did. Darius tells his butler that the best part of it all is Colin defying Slaith's orders. Soon afterward, another opponent is brought forward, and Slaith tells the nobles who trusted him that they have nothing to worry about because they are just trying to give Colin hope to make everything even more interesting. He tells them that Colin will be torn to shreds in the next round, but he hasn't even finished his statement when Colin takes down his second opponent. Colin does it so confidently that he even places his foot on his opponent to show dominance. Slaith cannot believe his eyes, and the nobles immediately turn to him, telling him that he is already straying away from their agreement. Slaith is pissing his pants at this point, wondering why Colin is doing the opposite of what he was ordered to do. Without hesitation, Slaith orders that they gather all the gladiators, but Darius is enjoying every bit of it because it is interesting to watch. In his previous life, Colin remembers that Darius had aimed for a world where everyone could learn magic equally, and he entrusted him with that ideal. In the end, they failed at this, but with his current ability, Colin is confident that he can make it happen. His first step is to impress Darius if he wants a chance to infiltrate his family. He knows that defeating his opponents is not enough, and he needs something daring. He tells all of the gladiators to take him on at once, and the fools obliged him. They rush toward him, but unknown to them, they are rushing to their deaths. With his superb skill, Colin cuts down the gladiators one by one. While he is doing this, the commoners are jumping for joy because they are making a lot of money. One of the gladiators launches a surprise attack from behind, but Colin blocks the attack before thrusting his sword into his body with so much force that it flies through the back. The sword travels at a crazy speed that it almost cuts Slaith's head off, but luckily lodges into the wall behind him. Slaith's life flashes before his eyes, and he is pissed that Colin has humiliated him in every way possible. While Colin is smiling because everything is going according to the way he planned it, Slaith is losing his mind over how he is going to make Colin pay for humiliating him. Seeing how everything is played out, Darius teases Slaith, telling him that it appears that the chess piece has become the player and the fisherman has become the fish. Darius lets him know that his plans are already ruined, and the other nobles are pissed when they hear this. They berate Darius, telling him that he is acting as if what is happening doesn't concern him when he is the Lord of the Rhine territory. They ask him if he plans to let a lowly slave who defied a noble walk free. The nobles tell Darius that Colin must be executed, which is the highest penalty that can be given. However, Darius's mood immediately changes as he asks the nobles if it is normal for them to look down on others. Darius's words hit heavy, and they ask him if he is still pursuing his false ideals. They explain that 1,000 years ago, their ancestors were granted magic by the god, and a clear hierarchy was born into the world at that very moment. Slaith says that by inheriting magic, they basically became mini-gods, but instead of Darius behaving like one, he is clinging to stupid ideologies. Slaith walks up to Darius, asking him if he plans to defy their great god. Colin sees this and immediately uses it as an opportunity. He suddenly appears in the stands, asking Slaith if there is anything wrong with Darius's ideal. The nobles freak out when they see Colin sitting amongst them, and they start foaming at the mouth, yelling at him, asking him why a mere commoner would make a fool of their god. They call on the guards to arrest Colin, but Colin does the most shocking thing, asking Slaith to fight him if he is really a proxy of God. Slaith groans in frustration, but because he cannot take the humiliation, he has no choice but to step into the arena to fight Colin. The nobles believe that Colin is already a dead man for challenging Slaith to a duel. Darius, on the other hand, is watching attentively to see what would happen. Slaith cooks up his magic while revealing his annoyance at how Colin ruined his plans, while also humiliating their god. To top it all up, he even challenged him to a duel, and this is the breaking point of all. As Slaith prepares his attack, Colin hears a strange voice in his head, telling him that mana has been detected. It immediately dawns on him that it is the grimoire, and just then, a status window pops up in front of him, showing Slaith's stats. It turns out that he is still at a beginner level when it comes to magic, and his preferred magic type is wind magic. His aptitude for magic is also low, while his swordsmanship level is still at a beginner level, and he has no resistance to magic. Slaith then unleashes his most powerful magic, the Wind Edge, to attack Colin because he is not about to forgive him for humiliating him. Even Darius is worried when he sees this because he knows what Wind Edge can do to someone. It is basically a magic that transforms the wind into a blade that slices the enemy to pieces, and the nobles are already placing a bet on how many pieces his body will be cut into. Slaith's attack hits successfully, with Slaith hoping to show Colin the difference between a noble and a slave. However, Slaith's supposedly powerful attack only rips Colin's shirt off and deals no damage to his body. Colin himself is disappointed by this, but at the same time he understands that the magic is at a beginner's level, which is why it is weak. At the same time, he has magic resistance, which is at beginner level too. Colin is glad that the magic resistance he acquired alongside the grimoire came in clutch at the most useful place. Colin easily dispels the magic because it is nothing compared to the magic of the demons. Slaith and the other nobles watched in total shock as Colin easily deletes Slaith's magic, while also dashing toward him at an insane speed. Slaith grabs his sword, aiming to block Colin's attack, but Colin's attack overwhelms him, knocking him to the ground. Colin holds his sword to his neck to show him that he is completely defeated. Suddenly, the grimoire warns him again of an imminent magic attack. Before Colin knows it, a magic circle appears underneath him, and dark skeleton hands grab him, holding him in place. Just then, some knights dressed in silver armor appear in the arena in response to the reports that they were concerning Colin defying a noble, while also insulting their god. The magic holding Colin gets even stronger, as he is completely restrained, with the knights revealing that they are detaining him in the name of their god. Colin struggles to stare at the men with his side eyes, and he realizes that they are the god's guards. In this world, the Magic Tower is an organization that was created with the purpose of promoting bloodline supremacy and maintaining God's authority. The God Guards are under the Magic Tower, and they are composed of nobles of the bloodline supremacy faction that possess strength far surpassing that of ordinary nobles. Even though Colin can easily break through the binding magic, he holds back because he is not about to grab the attention of the higher-ups just yet. However, he has another plan, and suddenly, he screams out, revealing that he is Darius's son, Colin Hall, shocking everyone in the arena. Everyone is stunned because this is the first time they will hear that the Marquis has another son, and Colin used this plan because the God Guards will never lay their hands on a noble, so he is waiting to see how everything will play out. Slaith picks up his weapon, aiming to cut down Colin, saying he is claiming to be noble blood just to save his skin. Suddenly, Darius's voice echoes through the arena, telling Slaith to stop what he is doing. Darius walks to the scene, and Slaith tells him that he is just about to finish Colin off. To everyone's surprise, Darius smacks Colin in the face, calling him a fool for dragging the family name through the mud. The God Guards and even Slaith can't believe their eyes when they hear this. Darius grabs Colin by the throat, telling him that he handed him over to the Merchant Guild to instill discipline in him, but it appears that it didn't work. Darius scolds Colin for laying his hands on Slaith, and seeing how Darius is playing along, Colin realizes that his gamble might play out after all. Darius then offers his apologies to Slaith for the rude behavior his idiot son displayed. Colin even makes it more fun by telling Darius that Slaith was the one who started it all, but Darius screams at him to keep his mouth shut. Darius turns to the God Guards, telling them that he is going to handle his son himself so they can all go back. However, Slaith refuses, telling the God Guards not to release Colin. Slaith holds his sword at Darius, screaming at him, telling him that he is only trying to deceive him with his ridiculous performance. Slaith assures Darius that he is not going to allow him to take Colin away from the spot because he has to kill him right there, no matter what. Colin immediately uses his own words against him, asking him if he has included the Lord of the Rhine territory in his attack list. Colin changes everything up, asking Slaith if he is trying to raise the banner of rebellion. Seeing where this is going, Slaith quickly drops his sword, saying Colin is getting it all wrong because this wasn't his intention. The leader of the God Guards then releases Colin from his binds, concluding that everything was just a matter of misunderstanding. The knight apologizes to Darius before telling him that they will now take their leave. Before leaving, the leader of the knights tells Slaith that he is definitely going to report what happened to the Magic Tower, and they are going to contact him concerning what they arrive at. Slaith crashes to the ground in frustration, realizing that he is done for. As they leave the arena, the leader of the God Guards tells his assistant to investigate Colin because he is pretty sure he has never heard of the Marquis having a son. He knows fully well that Colin is not Darius's son, and he tells them to follow Colin and report his every move to him. On their way to the Marquis' estate, Darius laughs his heart out in the carriage, commending Colin for putting up a nice performance. Colin then offers his sincere gratitude to the Marquis. It turns out that Darius had ordered his butler, Cornell, to settle the payment for his release. Just then, Darius asks Colin if he has ever been to the battlefield because his movements look like those of a seasoned warrior. Colin then tells the Marquis his story, saying he was brought up in a remote village, and after his parents died, he was sold off to a slave trade company. After this, a certain noble bought him and taught him the basic theories of magic and how to fight, just like a real father would. Colin says this noble left him with a grand ideal, but he failed at it. However, this time around, he plans to live up to his expectations. Colin reveals that he is willing to do anything, even at the expense of his life. His words shock Darius, and he realizes that Slaith's attack didn't work because Colin had learned the basics of magic. Darius realizes that Colin has a strong heart, and with this, Darius figures out that Colin might be able to realize his ideals. Moments later, they arrive at the estate, and Darius tells Colin to step into the estate, assuring him that he is no longer a slave. However, he tells him that this doesn't mean he has gotten into a life of peace and quiet, because survival of the fittest is the law of the world. Darius tells Colin that rescuing him and making him a noble is as far as his help goes, and it is up to him whether he can overcome the next trial. Just then, Darius calls Colin with the last name, Hall, while telling him that he is counting on him. Colin heaves a sigh of relief because the first phase is finally complete. It is common knowledge that nobles marry their equals to preserve the authority of their magic and bloodlines, and the Hall family is obsessed with this bloodline supremacy. However, Darius is an exception because his mother was a servant and he suffered terrible prejudice. Nonetheless, through tireless effort and overwhelming strength, he ascended to a high rank and became the Lord of the Rhine territory, which is a name known to all. As they walk through the estate hall, Darius tells Colin that his past doesn't matter to him because in his household, strength is everything. Darius assures Colin that he is going to give him everything he desires, starting from status, honor, and even wealth if he has the skills to earn them. Since Darius said he would give him anything, Colin shocks him, asking him if he would gladly give him his seat as the Lord if this is what he wants. The question shocks both Darius and Cornell, but surprisingly, Darius laughs this off like it is nothing. Darius assures Colin that he is willing to give him the seat if he is confident enough to take it. Colin is not entirely surprised by Darius's reaction because he has always known him to be a meritocrat who believes in equal opportunity for all. This kind of thinking got him despised by the bloodline supremacists, and even his enemies are within his own family. Just then, they get into the main hall to find Darius's family waiting for him to welcome him home. Fried Hall is his eldest son, and his wife is Katrina Williams. Katrina welcomes him, saying they have been waiting for him, but Darius is not entirely pleased because he didn't tell anyone he was coming back home. This just shows that he can't hide anything from his wife, and Katrina claims that rumors travel quickly among the citizens when he travels. Katrina mentions that she even heard about Darius's dispute with Viscount Slaith over a certain slave, thanks to a little bird. Darius is not entirely surprised because he knows that his wife has spies tailing him. Colin also recognizes Katrina, and she is known as the ruler in the shadows. She was the one who made his life a living hell in the previous life, making sure she thwarted him and Darius's plan. Because she inherited her title and entire fortune from her late parents, Katrina is treated as an equal to the first wife, despite the fact that she is the second wife. As it stands, she is currently making her son, Fried, the successor to Marquis's throne. Colin fell into her trap in his last life, but he is confident that it won't happen this time around. Colin then greets the woman and her son, introducing himself as Colin Hall. Fried hears this and almost crashes out immediately as he starts asking Colin who the hell he is. Just as he is about to move forward to challenge him, his mother stops him. Katrina then turns to Cornell, asking him how a mere slave is able to use a noble's name. Katrina scolds Cornell, telling him that he is not doing his work very well, but Colin piles on the misery by pulling out his weapon. Colin tells the woman that he received the surname from Darius himself, and he would like to know if she and her son object to this decision. Colin's arrogance bears down on them like a sharp razor, and Colin continues by saying he is going to become the lord of the territory in the future, so he is going to make all of them bow to him. This angers the two even more, but Darius cannot be more pleased by everything that is going on. The servants and butlers are shocked by Colin's confidence, wondering what he meant by becoming the lord of the territory. Katrina can no longer take it in, and she lashes out, scolding Colin for speaking out rashly when he is nothing but a lowly slave. The moment she says this, the butlers and servants whip out weapons and surround Colin, following Katrina's orders to seize Colin. However, Darius steps in, telling the butlers to stay still because everything Colin said was true. Darius reveals that, depending on his performance, he is already considering him for the position of the territory's lord. Fried protests this decision, asking his father what has gotten over him. Since Darius has spoken, Katrina decides that she has nothing else to say. However, she reminds Darius that in the estate, hundreds of servants work themselves to the bone, but only a tiny handful of them have ever been granted a family name. Katrina tells Darius that with this arrangement, it is expected that not everyone will be satisfied with it. Since this is the case, she suggests that they put Colin to the test. Darius asks her what she means by test, and Katrina says Colin has to prove his strength so that everyone can be satisfied. However, if he fails, he has to follow the house rules and leave the house in disgrace afterward. Colin cuts in saying this is not enough, and Fried confidently asks him if he is scared, which is why he won't accept this arrangement. Colin then says there is no point in making him take the test alone. In fact, he believes that everyone should take the test, and the name should be given to whoever clears it. Colin says a person who is actually competent should be the heir, and not some failure who just happened to have been born into the Hall family. This gets to Fried really well because he realizes that Colin is making fun of him. Fried is foaming at the mouth, since he has never received this kind of ridicule ever in his life. Fried cannot believe that he has to compete against servants and slaves for the position of the heir. He is about to lose his mind when his mother taps him on the shoulder, reminding him to always remain elegant and not get worked up over a monkey. Katrina tells Fried that he possesses the absolute power of magic, so they should just sit back and watch from above. Even though he is pissed, Fried has no choice but to listen to his mother. After everything, Darius ended up going with Colin's plan, and it was decided that a selection test for volunteers would be held in exactly 1 month. However, until then, Colin has to work as a low-level servant just like he did in his previous life. On his way to the slave quarters, Cornell tells Colin that he can clearly see that he knows exactly what Darius wants. Colin plays dumb when he hears this, and Cornell says Darius is hated because of his noble ideals. Cornell then says, according to Colin's story, he was picked up by a certain noble before he met him at the slave arena. However, according to the information he got from the Slave Association, Cornell says he heard that he was brought directly from a remote village. Cornell whips out his dagger, saying Colin showed up just when Darius was worried about who was going to succeed him. Cornell grabs Colin and holds his dagger to his throat, telling him that everything was a bit too convenient. And Colin tells Cornell that he is actually right because there is logic in what he said. However, the Slave Association is the type of people who would fix a match without giving it a second thought. He mentions that they made arrangements with Slaith to try to rip people off their money. Colin asks Cornell if he thinks the association would just leave him alone after he defied their orders. Cornell takes a moment to think about it and remembers that the merchant told him that Colin's strength was intermediate at best, but the movements he showed during the fights were clearly at an advanced level or even higher. In swordsmanship and even in magic, there are clear levels that have been defined by the Empire. Most people even hit their limit at intermediate, but only a fraction can reach the advanced level, and levels beyond these are in a realm of their own. Since most nobles focus on magic, their swordsmanship is only at a beginner level, but in special organizations like the God Guards, an advanced level of proficiency is required. Cornell wonders if the merchants deceived him with false information just to get rid of Colin. Seeing the hesitation in his face, Colin figures out that Cornell has come to a realization already. Colin then tells Cornell that he has something else to tell him to clear the fact that he is not a spy. Colin says if he were a spy, he would be aiming for the position of the Lord, and Cornell asks him what he means by this. Colin explains that it is typical of a spy to get into the target's inner circle and seize their weaknesses. This basically means that if he were a spy, he would be gunning for Cornell's position and not Darius's position. Cornell is still confused by this, and Colin further explains that if he takes the position of head butler, grabbing the Lord's weaknesses would be nothing but a piece of cake. Since they have come to this, Colin suggests that they make a deal. He tells Cornell that he is going to use his position as a servant to sniff out the spies of other nobles, but in exchange, he wants Cornell to cooperate with him. Cornell asks him if he realizes that he would be making an enemy of other nobles by doing this, and Colin confidently replies that this is a situation that is called high risk, high reward. In addition, if something were to happen to Darius, his dream of becoming his successor would be void. Upon hearing this, Cornell realizes that Colin is pretty strong and sharp as well. Since the deal looks too good, Cornell can only wonder if Colin has other plans in mind. However, he decides to move past his worries at that moment and tells Colin to follow him so he can show him his living quarters. It turns out that the servants of the house are divided into 3 ranks, which were created by Katrina. There are high-class servants who serve Katrina, Darius, and their son. There are also middle-class servants who are permitted to live within the mansion alongside them. Sitting at the bottom are the lower-class servants who live in the detached quarters. In addition, lower-class servants are forbidden from even approaching the mansion. And since Colin is a low servant, his main duties will be waste disposal, chopping wood, and tending to the horses. It turns out that the pay for this is 3 copper coins per day. Cornell then tells him a rule that is absolute, which is the fact that he has to respect his senior servants no matter what. When Colin hears this, he turns to his side to see his seniors already laughing because they have supposedly obtained a new toy to play with. As Cornell walks away, he tells Colin that these are rules that were decided by Katrina. Trying to be a good guy, Colin walks up to his seniors, introducing himself and telling them that he looks forward to working with them. Instead of just accepting Colin's goodwill like that, they decide to be douchebags. They start making fun of Colin, teasing him into thinking he can become the next lord. One of them walks up to Colin, saying he heard how he picked a fight with the lady of the house. The dumb fools tell Colin that they are going to teach him how to greet properly. One of them grabs a bottle and breaks it to use it as a weapon. He tells Colin to get on his knees and keep saying he looks forward to working them while slapping himself across the face. The dude tells him that he is going to continue with this until they are satisfied. One overestimates himself and grabs Colin on the shoulder, pointing fingers at him while asking if he understands what they asked of him. Colin has finally had enough and he grabs the dude's arm, twisting it to the back, causing him so much pain that he screams out in agony. Even his friends watch in surprise, and Colin ends it by kicking him into a wall, ultimately knocking him out. Colin is not yet done with him as he walks up to him, telling his seniors that since they said he shouldn't hold back from slapping his own face, he is going to follow their instructions. He starts slapping the dude left and right, while telling him that he looks forward to working with him. The other two lose their cool as they stare at Colin beating up their friend. The one with a bottle rushes toward Colin and the other one grabs, but Colin grabs his sword and hurls it at the dude with a bottle. By holding the scabbard, he is able to launch the sword out to hit the dude on the face, knocking him to the ground. The dude with a table watches in horror as his friend crashes to the ground beside him with his face disfigured. Before he knows what is happening, Colin serves him his own share of the punishment. Colin leaps toward him, kicking him in the face, sending him flying into the distance. The dude is still trying to pull himself together when Colin's sword appears beside his head with Colin standing above him, asking him if he is now satisfied. The dude screams out like a pig, telling Colin that he is more than satisfied. Colin accepts his conviction and he decides to back off. But the dude is not about to be humiliated by a boy. He grabs the broken bottle and launches a surprise attack on Colin, but this turns out to be his greatest mistake. Colin reacts within the space of a second and cuts off the dude's hands, leaving the dude with a memento that he will never forget. When Colin retires to his room that night, he decides to practice his magic because he doesn't know what will happen in the future, and he cannot afford to slack off. Apparently, when Katrina married Darius, she replaced the majority of the Hall family servants with her own people, and she established a strict system. Thanks to this, the relationship between the two, who were already incompatible because of their ideologies, only got worse. In the midst of all these, Cornell was chosen as the butler to keep Katrina in check. Basically, Cornell has the power to drive out Katrina's people and even has the power to be involved in selecting the heir. This simply means no one will be able to become the heir without Cornell's approval. However, in Colin's previous life, Cornell's death became the catalyst for Katrina to suddenly gain the power to push her own into the position of successor. Colin knows that things wouldn't have ended the way they did if Cornell were alive. On the other hand, Colin is worried about the fact that he only has beginner-level magic resistance, which is why he needs a magic that would serve as both offense and defense for him. Colin taps into the grimoire's resources, and he groans in pain as the contents of the grimoire start flowing into his head. It is as if he is being bitten by 1,000 ants as an overwhelming amount of energy courses through his body. The situation also feels like his blood, bones, and soul are being swallowed by hot lava. Voices echo in his head, calling his name, while also trying to fill his head with things he would do. Colin soon realizes that he's reached his current limit. He is not entirely happy with this because he knows that nobles have it easy thanks to their bloodline. Surprisingly, this only provides him with an avenue to be fired up because he wants to surpass everyone, nobles included. Colin keeps pushing himself until he eventually gets knocked out. The next morning, Colin steps out of the quarters to see that his seniors are already working. He teases them, saying they have woken up early, and he also thought they would attack him during the night. The servants couldn't even say anything because they were not about to suffer round 2 of what Colin did to them the day before. Colin smiles because they are lucky they didn't attack him, since it would have been disastrous for them. Colin stares at the status window and realizes he has gained magic, but it is still at the beginner level, whereas his swordsmanship is at the grandmaster level. Colin smiles because his efforts were not in vain, and everything came out successfully. Colin yawns with a carefree attitude, saying he's exhausted from the training the night before, so he is just going to get something to eat. His apparent seniors are pissed, but there is nothing they can do to him. Shortly afterward, the guard corps showed up at the quarters, and the servants immediately bow their heads to the guards and their bald-headed leader, who is the vice captain. A servant is in the process of fetching water when the guards show up, so he didn't know about their arrival. One of the guards takes this against him and kicks him in the chest, telling him to stop standing in the middle of the road. The water he is carrying ends up spilling on the captain's shoe. Knowing fully well that he is in trouble, the servant bows to the captain, begging him to forgive him because the whole thing happened, while he was not watching where he was going. The captain acts all nice, kneeling in front of the servant, telling him that he doesn't blame him. The dude is about to start celebrating his escape when the baldy tells him that he wants his eyes since they are not working. Without hesitation and mercy, he pulls out the servant's eyes in the most gruesome way. The other servants can only watch without being able to do anything. One of the overzealous guards then tells the servants to get on their knees instead of staring. While everyone is following the order, Colin is walking around, totally oblivious to what is going on around him. Colin is more focused on what he should eat, and the dude who lost his hands the day before immediately calls the baldy's attention to Colin's arrogance. He adds that Colin was the one who cut off his hands, and he urges the captain to be careful of Colin because he is obviously not normal. Instead of listening to the armless dude, the captain decides to summon Colin. Colin casually turns around, asking him if he wants his hands cut off too. The dude returns the energy, telling Colin that he and his boys are not as soft as Darius and Katrina. The guards immediately pull out their swords and they walk up to Colin, telling him to cut off his arm or they will help him with it. Since they have decided to take the violent route, Colin also gives them a choice, asking them if they would rather keep their arms or their heads. The captain suddenly takes another route, telling Colin that they are not in the business of brawling with people like him. Instead, they have someone else who is going to deal with him, and this person is the former champion of the slave arena, Dak. It turns out that Dak is a guard corps reserve, so he is a mid-level servant, but he is no stranger to Colin. In fact, he is surprised that he would meet Dak in such a situation because in his previous life they happened to be close pals. With the scars on his body, Colin figures out that Dak was getting beaten by the guards just moments earlier. Colin then asks Dak if he is going to fight in the captain's place, and Dak holds his sword at Colin, telling him that the rule states that low-rank servants obey mid-rank servants and juniors obey seniors. Dak believes that whoever breaks the rule should be punished. Colin asks Dak if he is not allowed to complain even though he is getting treated really badly, and this question hits Dak so hard that he finds it hard to answer. Dak remains motionless, and before everyone realizes what is going on, Colin dashes past him, grabbing his sword. In the blink of an eye, he reaches the captain and he holds a sword to his neck, ready to cut him open. The guards are stunned, and they scream in shock, wondering how Colin made his way to the captain. Even Dak cannot believe his eyes because Colin simply went past him in an instant, even grabbing his sword in the process. With a sword on his neck, the captain still tries to act arrogant, screaming at Colin, asking him who he thinks he is. The dude reveals that he was personally chosen by Freed, and if he hurts him, he is going to make an enemy of Freed and the servants. Colin looks around, and he sees the servants staring at him weirdly, so he decides to back off. The captain believes that his bluff worked, and he tells Colin that he can't let him go scot-free. However, he has something else to do before he switches his anger to Colin. Suddenly, the guards cut Dak's back with their swords as punishment for disappointing him. As if this isn't enough, they still pierce Dak's hand with a sword while telling him that he wasted the perfect opportunity to show his worth. Seeing how they are treating Dak, Colin loses it and he angrily attacks them, cutting their heads off. The captain gets the chance to attack Colin from behind, and he quickly takes it. However, Colin reacts instantaneously and cuts down his sword. Dak lets him know that it won't be his sword next time, but his head. Colin swings at him, ready to teach him a lesson, but in a surprising turn of events, Dak still comes to the captain's rescue. He blocks Colin's attack, leaving Colin to wonder why Dak is still helping the dude even after what happened. Dak pushes Colin backwards, telling him to stop committing more crimes. Dak holds his sword firmly with his injured hand, and seeing the pain Dak is going through, Colin tells the captain that he is going to let him off, but lets him know that there won't be a next time. Colin tells the guards to get lost, and after they are gone, Colin asks Dak why he is licking their feet even though he is stronger than they are. Dak only turns around to tell Colin that he is done for because he shouldn't have defied the captain. As for why he is acting like a fool, Dak says he has no obligation to tell Colin because he is about to die. Dak throws his sword to him, telling him that he can keep it since the sword is bad luck for him anyway. Later on, the captain still punishes Dak by pushing his head into a water jar instead of appreciating him for saving his worthless life. Dak apologizes to the dude and he gets thrown to the floor like trash. One of the guards asks the captain if he's going to let Colin go scot-free, but he reveals that he has no intention of doing this. The captain tells his subordinate to spread the word that Colin has declared war on the elite servants so that they can strip him of his place in an attempt to completely isolate him. On the other hand, Colin still can't wrap his head around Dak's refusal to fight back. Shortly afterward, the servants sit down to eat, and the high servants get served with the best of the best, while the mid-rank servants also get a mouthful. The low ranks, on the other hand, have to queue to get their food, which is trash. Colin, who has been hungry, shows up to take his own food, but the servant serving the food refuses to serve him. He even grabs the plate in front of Colin and returns the food to the pot. Colin turns around and notices that the servants are staring at him in such a weird way, but instead of arguing with them, he does something that is shocking. He walks past the mid-rank servants and heads to the dining room reserved for the high-rank servants, shocking the servants. Colin arrives at the dining area and even pushes two servants aside, shocking them. The maids waste no time demanding that someone remove Colin from the area. Colin walks to the dining table to grab his desired food, while the servants gang up on him, asking him what it is that he is doing. Colin ignores them until Cornell shows up, telling Colin that he is currently standing where the elite servants eat. Even with this, Colin doesn't seem to be bothered, and the other servants immediately demand that Cornell punish Colin. Cornell realizes that things are going to go sideways if he doesn't handle it fast, and he concludes that it was all a misunderstanding, since Colin doesn't know his way around just yet. Cornell then tells Colin to follow him, and the other servants watch in disappointment as Cornell leads Colin away without punishing him, just as they wanted. Cornell then asks Colin if he has forgotten the rule of absolute obedience to his superiors, and Colin says he has forgotten. However, he reminds Cornell that Darius said he would reward them based on their abilities, and with the way things are, he has the strength to earn a proper meal. Just then, Cornell tells him that he has accepted his proposal from before, assuring him that he is going to help him with his daily activities from that moment forward. In exchange for this, Cornell wants Colin to find the spy who is hiding in the house. Moments later, they spot the hunting signal, and Colin is surprised to see this. He asks Cornell why Darius is heading to the hunting grounds so early in the morning. Cornell reveals that there have been reports of something unusual in the gloomy deep forest close to them, and he is planning to investigate while hunting too. Upon hearing that the mission has something to do with the gloomy forest, Colin becomes interested in the whole thing immediately. Soon afterward, Colin is seen in the gloomy forest, hunting down a red-eyed black deer. Hiding in the bush, he fires a precise shot that releases 3 arrows at once, taking down the deer in one move. After taking down the deer, Colin emerges from the bush and he cuts the deer open with his knife. To his surprise, he finds a monster core inside the deer. Apparently, monster cores are processed into necklaces and the like, but according to the grimoire, they can also be used to craft potions and special items that enhance one's abilities. However, the core's properties depend on the monster's species and rank. With a closer look, he could see that the core he is holding is bottom tier, and it is fine for making mana potions. Before coming into the forest, Colin had told Cornell about his interest in entering the hunting grounds. Cornell is surprised to hear this because after the anomaly in the dark forest, the only ones allowed inside are the guard corps, the elite knights, or authorized personnel. Colin still finds a loophole in this, saying he is free to enter as long as he is with the guard corps. Colin is busy rummaging through the deer's insides when Dak appears on the scene, totally exhausted. It turns out that he has been looking for Colin, who suddenly vanished. Dak can't believe his eyes when he sees Colin standing over a deer because only nobles and mid-level servants or higher are allowed to hunt. Colin ignores his complaints and borrows his sword. Colin pushes the sword into the deer, telling Dak that this has solved the problem because it will appear as if Dak was the one who took down the deer. Dak frustratingly yells at Colin, telling him that his stupid logic won't work. Dak hasn't even spent an hour with Colin and he is already frustrated. He blames Cornell for pairing him up with Colin and he still doesn't know what the butler was thinking when he did this. Dak was on his own when Colin suddenly showed up, telling him that he had just received a mission from Cornell. Colin has Cornell's dagger as proof of the mission. Basically, they are to head to the hunting grounds to assist Darius with the investigation and secure some provisions in the process. Dak cannot believe how rotten his luck is to have been paired with a troublesome person like Colin. However, Dak decides to just focus on the mission in the meantime. Moments later, Dak cuts up the deer's meat with the intention of packing everything back home, hoping to prove himself so he can become an official member. Before he knew what was going on, Colin had packed some of the meat and had started grilling it. Dak freezes in shock when he sees this, as he asks Colin what it is that he is doing. Colin casually replies that he is grilling meat, but Dak argues with him, saying the provisions are for Darius and his family, so he is not allowed to just eat them whenever he wants. Colin bites down on a big chunk, telling Dak that they have a lot, so it won't hurt to take some. He pushes the meat to Dak, telling him to eat some too. Dak tries to ignore the offer, and Colin reminds him that he only gets fed once every 3 days. In addition, he tells Dak that he is going to get punished either way because he allowed him to take his weapon. To compensate for this, Colin suggests that he eat to his fill. Colin adds that Dak won't be able to protect the head of the family on an empty stomach while assuring him that he is not going to tell anyone. He pushes the meat close to his nose and Dak can no longer resist, forcing him to grab the big chunk of meat. He runs to a corner to pounce on the meat like a dog while deluding himself that what he is doing is for the good of the family. With the way Dak is eating, Colin could see that he is starving, and he uses the opportunity to ask him why he is always doing whatever the other guards ask him to, when he is clearly stronger than they are. Dak replies that being strong doesn't mean anything because devotion to their god grants them nobility, and he hopes he will be reincarnated as a noble in his next life. He reveals that he worked really hard to become a mid-level servant so his little sister living in the countryside could have a brother that she is proud of. He yells at Colin, telling him that what he is suggesting is that he throws everything he has worked hard for. Dak admits that he doesn't know why Darius is a meritocrat, but he believes that they are just lucky to be servants. Dak has the belief that they should work as hard as they can without questioning anyone. Colin then dunks on him, telling him that he is overestimating whatever divine power the nobles have because it is just magic. Dak replies that, since it is nothing to him, he should go ahead and use 1 or 2 spells. Colin then shocks him, asking him what he would do if he told him that he could use magic. This immediately grabs Dak's whole attention, and he stares into Colin's eyes intently, asking him if he can use magic. Before they can get deep into the conversation, they hear a scream in the distance that catches their attention. It turns out that the scream is from a group of guards who are fighting a pack of flame wolves. The team is getting shredded by the sheer number of wolves, and the leader of the group, Glenn, can't believe that he is actually struggling against a bunch of wild monsters. He is able to guard against the wolf targeting him before cutting down the monster. Suddenly, he is overwhelmed by the wolves, but just as he is about to crumble, arrows come flying out of nowhere, taking down the wolves that are onto him. It turns out that his saviors are Colin and Dak. Colin recognizes the flame wolves, which are said to be quite expensive because taking down one is enough for one to live comfortably for a while. The most important part of it all is that the wolves have powerful cores, which he needs. With this in mind, Colin is ready to hunt down every single one of them so he can obtain their cores. Colin doesn't even think twice before lunging towards the wolves, shocking Glenn. Colin, on the other hand, is not threatened by the wolves because they are no match for him. Colin makes light work of them as he fires off several shots to take them down. One of the wolves launches a surprise at Colin from behind, but he reacts to dodge the attack. Colin is surprised that the wolves are still attacking even after seeing the clear difference between him and them. As the wolf leaps past his head, Colin is able to attack at the right spot, kicking the wolf so hard that it is sent flying into the distance, shocking the guards. Colin didn't stop there as he finished off the wolf by firing a precise arrow into it. The rest of the wolves immediately recognize Colin as the main threat, and they change their attention to him. However, they only rush to their deaths, and Glenn is left speechless because they were struggling against the wolves, but Colin is basically toying with them. One of the wolves angrily goes after Colin, unleashing a wave of fire attacks at him, but Colin leaps into the air to dodge the attack. Colin retaliates by firing a bunch of arrows into the wolf before lunging toward it, kicking it into the ground to finish it off. Colin relaxes after this, but suddenly an arrow flies past his head, and just as he is about to believe the arrow is meant for him, the arrow impales a wolf gunning for him from behind. It turns out that Dak just saved his life, and he tells Colin not to let his guard down. Colin winks at the dude while giving him thumbs up for a job well done. With this, the two are able to clear out the wolves, and Glenn commends them, telling them that they are both skilled. He then asks them who they serve, and Dak replies that they might not be direct subordinates, but they serve Darius. He introduces himself as a reserve in the guard, while revealing that Colin is a lowly servant, and he mentions that they are there to provide backup under Cornell's orders. Glenn and his team are blown away when they learn about their statuses. Glenn's men despise the fact that they were saved by low-ranking servants, and while they are busy talking trash, Colin is already pulling out the monster cores. It turns out that the wolf's core is of intermediate rank, and Colin believes that he would be able to get what he wants as long as he follows the procedure in the magic book. Suddenly, the big guy in Glenn's squad, Marvin, yells at Colin, asking him who gave him permission to touch the monster. Glenn quickly comes in, telling the dude to leave the monster to Colin because at the moment, Darius is their priority. Colin is not about to let everything slide because the dude called him a brat, and he reminds him that the so-called brat just saved his life. The dude loses his cool, but he is held back by Glenn and the lady on the team, Sarah. Colin is no stranger to the trio because he knows them from his previous life. Apparently, the trio and Cornell were Darius's most trusted allies. It turns out that they lost their lives in the past, and it happened when they were investigating the gloomy deep forest, which eventually triggered Darius's loss of power. Colin is glad that he ended up there because he is going to change their fate to make sure they don't face any danger. Seeing how Marvin is raging, Dak quickly comes in, urging the team to chill out because Colin is a newcomer, so he doesn't know the rules just yet. Sarah ends up trashing Dak, calling him Katrina's dog, while urging him to stay out of it all. When Glenn hears that Colin is a newcomer, he immediately figures out that he is the dude who dared to tell Katrina that he was going to become the Lord. Glenn admits that Colin is pretty strong, but he lets him know that he might later regret his actions if he doesn't discard his ambition. Glenn tells Colin that they have to leave because they have a mission, but he assures him that he appreciates the fact that he saved them. Suddenly, a wave of imminent danger hits the surrounding area, and before they know it, the king of the Flame Wolves shows up with its pack. The team panics when they see this, since it is quite obvious that the king of the Flame Wolves is not to be messed with. To make it worse, the king came with enough reinforcements, and just then, one of the wolves attacked Glenn. Glenn freezes in fear as he waits to be stomped to the ground, but Colin comes to his rescue again, leaving him to sincerely ask Colin who he is. Colin simply smiles at him, telling him that he just saved his life again. Colin tries to cut down the Wolf King, but his attack is repelled. Before he knows it, he gets pushed back, and Colin figures out that with his current strength, he can't take down the beast with only swordsmanship. Seeing how he was pushed back, Sarah and Glenn ask Colin if he is fine because the Wolf King is a formidable opponent who has taken down countless Imperial elites. Before the team knows it, the wolves have already boxed them in, and Marvin screams out asking his boss what they are supposed to do in this situation because dealing with the regular wolves is already enough of a problem, but they now have the king actively gunning for their head. Just then, Colin tells Marvin that he doesn't need to worry about the regular flame wolves because they are nothing more than puppets to the king. Colin explains that the flame wolves follow their king's orders, so they don't possess anything close to an independent will. Basically, if they take down the king, the underlings are done for. Glenn is shocked when he realizes that Colin is suggesting that they fight the king, and even Dak supports Glenn, saying there is no way they are going to defeat an opponent that even the Imperial elites couldn't touch. As if this isn't bad enough already, he lets Colin know that their swords are damaged. However, Colin tells the team that there is no way to know if they can win or not if they don't try. Glenn agrees with him that all roads lead to them fighting to survive. Nonetheless, Sarah doesn't think it is going to be easy to swarm through a dozen flame wolves just to get to the king. Colin cuts in, telling them that they don't have to do this because an opportunity is going to present itself very soon. Just then, the Wolf King lets out a loud roar that carries an intimidating presence. This turns out to be an order from the king to tell his underlings to attack the team. Glenn tells his men to prepare to retaliate, but Colin tells them to chill out because they need to draw the wolves closer. Marvin yells at Colin, asking him who gave the authority to give orders. However, Glenn urges Marvin to calm down because they don't have the time to fight among themselves, so they are just going to do what Colin says in the meantime. Just then, Colin tells Dak to follow him, and Dak is confused when he hears this. He hesitates, and Colin asks him if he is ready to be a big brother that his sister can be proud of or not. Colin's words hit deep, and they make Dak remember his sister Erica. As the wolves charge in further, Colin tells the team not to make a move, but they should allow the wolves to move in better. Once they are in the position that he wants, Colin tells Glenn to blind the attacking wolves with his sword skill, Sacred Shield. Glenn does as told, and the moment the wolves go blind, Colin screams at Marvin, telling him to blow the wolves away with his heaven-shaking slash. Marvin follows his instructions, and he leaps into the air before hitting the ground with a powerful blast that sends the wolves scattering. However, Colin has already calculated his next plan, and he tells Sarah to clear a path with her skill, the Phantom Sword. Sarah follows Colin's orders, cutting through the wolves, and Glenn is totally blown away at how Colin got familiar with their individual skills. With Sarah paving the way for them, Colin makes his move, and he tells Dak to follow him. Sarah teases Dak again, calling him a puppy, while urging him not to disappoint. As they dash toward the Wolf King, Dak asks Colin what he is trying to do, and Colin explains that the king has always intimidated his opponents. However, if an enemy is to charge at him without fear, Colin is pretty sure that the king will also be shaken, since humans are the same way. Dak is still confused, and he asks Colin what he means by this. Colin ignores him and tells Dak that they can't take the king down only with swordsmanship. It immediately dawns on Dak that Colin is talking about using magic against the Flame Wolf King. Without hesitation, Colin activates his mana lines to prepare his magic activation. Once everything is put in place, Colin conjures ice flowers that he uses to attack the Wolf King. Dak watches in shock because he thought Colin was bluffing when he said he could use magic. After the first wave of attack, Colin teases the Wolf King, asking him if he still has plans of attacking. The Wolf King stays strong, maintaining his ground, but this only forces Dak to move in. He leaps toward the Wolf King and pierces his nose with his sword. Colin commends Dak, telling him to keep up the pressure. With the wolf struggling with Dak, Colin gets all the time in the world to cook up a powerful attack to hit the Wolf King. The Wolf King watches in horror as the attack hits him, coursing through his body like a blade. With this, the two defeat the wolf, and the rest of the pack immediately scatters. Dak is completely blown away by the fact that Colin actually has magic. Glenn and his team show up, thanking Colin for taking down the monster. Marvin is marveled, and he expresses his shock that they were able to defeat such a huge monster. Colin humbly tells them that their plan worked, and he doesn't know what would have happened if they hadn't helped. Sarah notices the ice shards on the ground, and she starts suspecting that Colin has magic, but the others are not focused on this. Marvin laughs out loud, saying Colin reminds him of when Darius was still a young man. Sarah then explains that they used to be members of the Lionheart Knights, which was led by Darius. After the Knight Order was disbanded, the remaining members became elite knights. Sarah dunks on Dak again, calling him the old hag's dog, leaving Dak to wonder what she means by this. He loses it and asks Sarah what he means by this because his name is Dak and not someone's dog. Marvin then whispers in Dak's ears, telling him that Sarah actually calls Katrina an old hag for some reason best known to her. Dak is relegated to the Stone Age when he hears this because he can't believe that someone actually has the audacity to call the lady of the house an old hag. The two soon get into an argument about whether Sarah is a lady or a young girl in her prime. While the two are busy messing around, Colin remembers just how good everything was with Dak in his previous life. Suddenly, the vibe killer, Freed, shows up on the scene, demanding to know what is going on. Everyone is shocked to see him since they weren't expecting him. Dak and the others immediately kneel down, and Freed claims he rushed over because he thought there was a commotion. Suddenly, he notices the bodies of the flame wolves on the ground, and he asks Glenn what happened. Glenn reveals that while they were investigating the forest, they were attacked by the pack, and they were saved by Dak and Colin. This is when Freed finally notices that Colin is there. Colin has been busy collecting monster cores, which is why he didn't make a move when Freed showed up. Just then, Glenn tells Freed that Dak and Colin are amazing, so it would be nice to report their achievements to the head of the family. The moment Freed hears this, he realizes that he is going to fall behind in the line of succession if his father hears of Colin's achievements. Freed is about to go crazy when he suddenly spots Dak, and a wild thought immediately comes to his head. Freed turns to Dak, reminding him that low-rank servants entering the hunting grounds is a blatant violation of the rules, and he continues by berating Dak, telling him that his sister would be disappointed if she learned about what happened. Colin cuts in, telling Freed that Dak is much better than him, who is just a spoiled brat who can't do anything without crying to his mommy. Colin finally turns his attention to Freed, calling him a failure as usual. Sarah almost passes out from laughter when she hears this, and Freed loses his mind, asking Colin if he just heard him right. Colin continues, telling Freed that his subordinates are not kneeling to him because they think he is impressive or anything. He lets him know that they are only respecting him because his mother is Katrina, a countess. The guards and even the servants couldn't believe just how audacious Colin was. Colin teases him, saying it must be nice for him to be able to act all high and mighty because his parents are important. Freed replies, reminding Colin that he has the power to kill someone like him in an instant, and Colin agrees with him. However, Colin still insults him, saying he would have to consult his mother first before doing this. Colin says it with a mocking tone that finally gets Freed mad. He loses his mind and orders that Colin be restrained. Suddenly, masked men appear on the scene, and Colin is immediately restrained with chains, and one of them puts a knife to his throat. Sarah and her squad recognize the group that just showed up. It turns out that they are a group of professional assassins and infiltrators who are kept by Katrina's family. Sarah admits that the group is so scary that even nobles tremble at the mere mention of their name. Sarah is surprised that Katrina entrusted her son's safety to scary people like this. Just then, Glenn gets on his knees, urging Freed not to overreact because Colin and Dak were sent by Cornell to assist with the investigation. Freed turns to Glenn in anger, asking him if he is also against him, and this question leaves Glenn stuttering. Seeing how the whole thing is progressing, Colin tells Glenn not to get involved. He tells him to leave and report the results of the investigation to Darius. Sarah immediately figures out that Colin is actually trying to help them escape, and since they can't take either side, Sarah suggests that they back off quietly. Glenn takes Colin's suggestion, and he humbly backs off, leaving Freed with all the control. Freed mocks Colin, telling him that he is totally helpless and his life is currently in the palm of his hand. Colin taunts him, telling him to kill him and stop wasting time. Freed smiles evilly, saying he just got a wonderful idea, and he calls on Dak. He gives Dak his weapon, telling him that actions come with consequences. He orders Dak to pick up the sword and kill Colin, and by doing this, he is going to forget everything that happened. In Colin's previous life, an incident had happened a month before the demon invasion. Colin and Dak were captured by orcs, and after being tortured for a while, the Orc King decided to do something fun. Dak is restrained, and the Orc King tells Colin to kill Dak with his own hands if he wants him to release the rest of the hostages. Colin picked up the sword, and he was left to choose between the lives of hundreds and his close buddy. As Colin walks toward Dak with the sword, Dak starts narrating his tragic background, talking about how his sister is the only family he has left. Darius took him in, but on Katrina's orders, Erica was sent away to the Williams family estate. Dak wants to believe that his sister is safe wherever she is, and he urges Colin to help take care of his sister after his demise. He talks about how his sister has always been a picky eater, but urges Colin not to overspoil her. Dak also begs Colin to tell his sister that he managed to become a full-fledged knight. After hearing his tragic story, Colin could only offer his sincerest sympathy. Now, in this current life, the roles have been reversed, and Colin is on the receiving end of the sword. Freed notices the hesitation in Dak's body, and he asks him why he is hesitating. Dak replies that he is hesitating because if not for Colin, they would all be dead, so it is pretty hard for him to kill his benefactor. Freed hears this and decides to play on Dak's emotional side, telling him how disappointed Erica would be if she learned that her brother abandoned her for a total stranger. Dak argues with Freed that he would never do such a thing, and Freed continues by saying he heard something about Erica some days before. It turns out that Erica has been starving herself to save up for a sword for her brother. In fact, she had collapsed from exhaustion thanks to this. Dak is completely broken when he hears this, and Freed adds that he will have no business looking after Erica if he can't do what he asks him to. Dak falls to his knees, begging Colin, urging him to save his sister, and Freed ultimately tells him to kill Colin if he wants his sister to be safe. Just then, Colin bursts out laughing like a maniac, leaving Freed confused. He asks Colin what is so funny to him, and Colin boastfully talks about how he can never die at the hands of a coward. Colin suggests that Freed allow him and Dak to engage in a fight to the death instead. Colin convinces Freed, telling him that it would be much better than watching Dak mope around the house. Freed is forced to think about the whole thing for a minute, and when he realizes that he has nothing to lose, he tells the assassins to let Colin go so that he and Dak can fight themselves. Once he is free, Colin grabs his sword and points it at Dak, shocking the dude. Dak is entirely confused because he doesn't know if Colin is serious or if he is putting up a play. Dak remains frozen, and Freed puts a bit of fire in him, telling him not to let his sister down. These words ring in his head over and over as Colin lunges toward him with his sword. Dak barely dodges the attack, and he is sent backwards by Colin's speed and immense strength. Colin continues attacking, leaving Dak totally shocked. Just then, Colin tells him that he has no choice but to attack him because he has no intention of dying too. Upon hearing this, Dak finally gets his head in the game, and he repels Colin's attack, forcing him to move back. Colin confidently tells Dak that he is going to end the match in 3 moves, and Dak replies with anger, telling Colin that he doesn't even need 3 moves, but 3 seconds. The two take a moment to analyze each other before finally making their move. They lunge toward each other, and as they get closer to each other, Colin whispers to him, telling Dak not to forget his comrades. The swords come into complete lock, giving Dak a moment to reflect on what Colin just said. It turns out that Colin's statement is something Dak holds dear to his heart. Once they have understood each other, the two move past each other instead of cutting each other. Just then, the two unleash a powerful slash with their weapons, leaving a swirlwind that blinds everyone, including Freed. Freed is completely confused, and suddenly, Colin appears above, lunging toward Freed with his sword. However, Freed blocks Colin's attack with his magic. Colin is surprised that Freed has some guts in him to fight. Freed angrily launches Colin to the ground with his lightning magic, while telling Colin not to underestimate him. The assassins want to interfere, but Fried yells at them to stay back because he wants to kill Colin himself. Fried angrily unleashes his magic to his full potential, shocking Dak because he recognizes what is happening. At the same time, the grimoire warns Colin, and Colin realizes that the whole situation is getting complicated. Colin checks Fried's stats on the status window and realizes that his magic level is intermediate, and he uses lightning magic. His magic aptitude is also at an intermediate level, but his swordsmanship is at a beginner level. The system warns him that since his magic resistance is still on the beginner level, he cannot withstand Fried's attack. Colin is shocked when he sees this, but he is not about to chicken out because of this, so he decides to continue the fight to know for sure. On the other hand, Fried is raging and he yells at Colin, telling him that he is about to show him the difference between their power. Fried unleashes his lightning magic, but Colin constructs an ice shield to block it. This leaves an impact explosion that scatters dust everywhere. Fried is shocked when he sees this because he doesn't want to believe that what he just witnessed is Colin using magic. Still in denial, he realizes that there are ice shards in the area, leaving him totally confused. The dust finally clears off, and Colin is seen standing strong, but with minor cuts. Colin taunts Fried, asking him if he has done his best. But the servants cannot believe that Colin actually survived Fried's attack. It starts to become clear to Fried that Colin must have used magic, but he still doesn't want to believe what is glaringly obvious. He refuses to believe that a mere slave like Colin has magic aptitude, and he prepares to use a greater attack magic. Colin is ready to block the attack, but to his dismay, the grimoire tells him that he cannot use magic at the moment because he has depleted his mana. Colin falls to his knees, knowing fully well that he is done for, and before he knows it, he gets hit by Fried's lightning attack. Colin screams out in pain as the lightning burns through his nerves, and Colin wonders if he is about to die again after he was given a second chance to redo everything. Colin starts tapping into everything he has in his desperation to stay alive. The grimoire notices this and warns him not to try to use magic without sufficient mana, because this might cause him to go berserk. Colin ignores the warning because he is not about to let himself get killed. He pushes himself to the limit, and suddenly, he is overtaken by a dark aura that transforms him into a cyborg. His stats shoot through the roof, and even the system couldn't calculate how high his magic is. The screen is hit with unknown figures, and Colin holds his head in pain, wondering what is happening to him. However, he decides to ignore whatever it is and just use the power before it runs out. Colin lunges toward Fried, who is completely overwhelmed. Fried puts up a defensive magic to stop Colin's charge. Colin easily breaks through the defense with his sword and almost cuts Fried's head off. Fried barely dodges this, but before he can even rest, Colin has come after him again. Colin's attack gets even more dangerous than the last, and Fried manages to dodge the attack, but his horse suffers the attack and gets cut down by Colin's anger. Fried leaps backward to dodge Colin's strikes, but he soon notices that Colin appears to be exhausted already. Fried decides to use this to his advantage. He cooks up a lightning shield, but Colin cuts through the lightning field like a rabid dog. Colin reaches Fried in no time, and Fried can already see himself in heaven. Just as Colin's sword is about to pierce his neck, a golden shield appears between him and the sword, repelling Colin's attack. This pushes Colin backwards, and Fried's savior turns out to be his father. Darius scolds the two, telling them that they are in a hunting ground, not an arena. He suggests that they wait till they get home if they are really interested in fighting each other. Seeing that Darius has arrived on the scene and is safe, Colin finally gives in, and he passes out. Some days later, Colin wakes up, and the first thing that flashes through his head is his cyborg transformation. He jumps off the bed in fear to check himself, and he heaves a sigh of relief that he is finally back to his normal self. Just then, he hears Dak's voice in the room, welcoming him back to life. Colin screams out in fear because Dak looks so pale, like a ghost. When he later calms down, Dak explains to him that he passed out after the fight with Fried. He mentions that Glenn was the one who carried him back, and Sierra handed him over to the physicians, while threatening to kill them if Colin dies. Colin gets off the bed and admits that he is feeling reinvigorated. He concludes that he is going to thank Sierra and the others for saving his life, while also getting something to eat in the process. Colin casually thanks Dak for his help too, and Dak is surprised that Colin actually knows how to say thanks. As they walk through the mansion, Colin notices that everyone is staring at him as if they have seen a ghost. He hears some maids talking about him and Fried, and he decides to ask them what they know. Surprisingly, the girls run off like they have seen a ghost, and Colin blames this on Dak, saying they couldn't stand his ugly, pale face. Dak yells at him, asking him whose fault he thinks it is because he couldn't get to sleep because he was watching over his knocked-out ass. The two are having their usual friendly rivalry when the Baldy and his men show up on the scene. The Baldy barges into the conversation, but they scream at him at the same time, telling him to stay out of their business. The dude is shaken from this, but when he finally calms down, he tells the two that he is there to settle the score from the day before. Colin has no idea what he is talking about, and the Baldy says Colin only caught him off guard in their last encounter. However, he is prepared this time around, and things won't go like that. Colin watches him in confusion, trying to understand what the dude wants. The Baldy then snaps his fingers, but nothing happens. He turns around to scold his men, telling them that they are supposed to make a move after he snapped his finger. But his men still remember what happened the last time they angered Colin, and in addition to this, they know about his fight with Freed, so they are not about to set themselves up for a beating. The captain realizes just how spineless his men are, but at the same time, he can't back down because of his ego. Just then, he grabs Dak by the collar, accusing him of betraying Freed. He tells Dak that he is going to take him to Freed to be punished. He tries punching Dak, but unlike before, Dak grabs his arm to stop the attack, telling the dude that he has no right to judge him. He pushes the dude to the ground, completely shocking him. Suddenly, Glenn and his men appear on the scene, demanding to know what the issue is that early morning. The Baldy sees this and assumes that Colin and Dak are done for because the elite knights don't play. The dude hypocritically bows to Glenn, welcoming him, and Glenn asks him what the issue is. The dude reveals that he was just about to teach Colin and his friend a lesson for being insolent. To his surprise, Colin greets them like his normal buddies, and the Baldy is about to take this up in anger. Shockingly, Marvin steps in, smacking the Baldy in the face to get him out of the way. The dude watches in complete surprise as Marvin and Sarah start playing with Colin like their buddy. The Baldy wants to believe that he is dreaming, and he immediately calls out the fault in elite servants playing around with lowly servants, saying it is a complete violation of the rules. Sarah then moves to tell him that they don't care about whatever rule Katrina made in the house. Sarah urges him to keep his mouth shut if he doesn't want to lose his other eye too. The dude watches as Colin walks away with Glenn's squad while mocking him, telling him that he just won again. The group makes their way to a tavern to enjoy, and Colin reveals his plan to thank them for saving him, but it turns out that they just saved him again. Glenn tells him that he is their savior, and Sarah adds that they have never liked the Baldy. Dak asks if they have history with the dude, but this gets Sarah mad, saying she doesn't want to hear anything about the dude. Dak quickly pulls back, apologizing for asking such a question. Just then, Glenn tells Colin and Dak that they would like them to join them, since they are the only 3 elite knights left. Dak almost loses his senses when he hears this because he never pictured himself in such a high stance. However, Colin reveals that he is not interested in becoming an elite knight, and this is because he has much bigger ambitions. The trio immediately knows what he is talking about, and this is the ambition to become Lord of the House. Marvin tells Colin to forget about his ambition to become Lord of the Territory and not get cocky just because he beat Freed with a mysterious swordsmanship. Marvin lets him know that Freed is not his only rival, and Sarah cuts in, telling Marvin that he is so dumb for thinking what Colin used was swordsmanship. Sarah hits the nail on the head, saying what Colin used was magic, and she is pretty sure that he also used magic to take down the Flame Wolf King. Marvin doesn't want to believe this because there is no way a former slave would have access to magic. Glenn then tells Colin to explain, and Colin finds himself in a tight spot because he was already worried that they would find out. However, he had already prepared for this in advance, and just before he lays out his excuse, Sarah jumps to the conclusion, saying Colin is a former noble. Sarah grabs Colin, saying she could sense this, explaining that Colin is the illegitimate child of a noble, persecuted, and forced into slavery by some sort of conspiracy. Sarah adds that it is Colin's goal to get everything he lost by joining Darius's household. Dak is surprised that Sarah came up with this, but to his utmost shock, Colin goes with the excuse, telling Sarah that she basically saw right through him. Sarah is glad to know that she is right, and Glenn condemns the Empire nobles. Colin starts narrating his fake story, saying he was originally a noble from the city of Isle, but he was driven out of his family by a conspiracy, forcing him to become a slave just to survive. While narrating this, Colin shed crocodile tears, saying he is not going to allow what happened to break him because he plans to make the nobles pay for what they did. Colin's story touches Marvin and Sarah so much that they start crying, offering their sympathy, while Dak just watches in amazement from behind. Since Sarah and Marvin have foolishly believed Colin's story, Dak believes that there is no way Glenn would fall for something like that. To his total dismay, Glenn appears to have fallen for Colin's story too, as he tells Colin that he is going to keep Colin's story a secret as long as he doesn't cause any trouble. However, he lets him know that he must never use magic in Katrina or Freed's presence, and Colin acknowledges this. After this, Glenn informs Colin that Darius has requested that he show up at his office once he wakes up. As Dak and Colin walk away, Glenn mouths the city of Ale subtly, revealing that he doesn't entirely believe Colin's story. On the other hand, Dak lets Colin know how surprised he is that his lie actually worked, but would like to know why Colin chose Ailey. Colin replies that Ailey is a melting pot of the good and the bad, and to top it off, Ailey is quite far from Rhine, which means it won't be easy for them to conduct an investigation. Colin says it is easy to throw people off with the pathetic noble story, and this forces Dak to show him a weird sign before asking Colin if he knows about the 3-legged crow, because he doesn't want to believe that it is another technique to throw people off. In a quick view into the past, it turns out that Colin cut down the orc to save Dak, telling him to tell his sister all the sweet things he told him. Colin went after the orc leader, but he blocked Colin's attack with his water shield. He throws Colin in the water shield, causing Colin to start drowning. The Orc King is busy boasting about how strong he is when Dak shows up below him, reminding him that he is still alive. Seeing Dak appear out of nowhere causes the Orc King to lose concentration, and Colin's sword is able to penetrate his defense. Colin and Dak end up cutting the Orc King down in the most ruthless way, ultimately defeating their enemy with incomparable teamwork. The two then wreak havoc on the orcs, cutting them down one after the other, while also arguing over how they should have executed their plan. Dak yells at Colin, telling him that he should have prioritized the hostages instead of saving him, and Colin replies that they still would have killed the hostages even if he had done what they wanted. Since this is the case, Dak tells him that he should have given him a signal instead, just to prepare him beforehand. Colin berates him, saying he can't exactly yell out his plan of attack. The two continue arguing, while the hostages just watch in so much confusion. During their argument, Dak makes the weird hand signal and reveals that it is the sign of the three-legged crow. Dak says he learned the signal from someone named Rowan back when he was in the Slave Association. Dak says the sign is to fish out friendlies, and whoever is a comrade will definitely help. Now, in the current life, Colin replies that he learned the hand signal from someone, but the person is already dead. Colin mentions that the dude was his stubborn best friend. Dak is surprised when he hears this because he doesn't know of an acquaintance from his days as a slave. Moments later, they arrive at the waiting room where Darius is waiting for them. Darius asks Colin how he is feeling, and Colin assures the man that he is completely better thanks to him. Darius then tells the two that he called them over for a reason, and it is concerning the incident in the hunting grounds. Dak immediately becomes worried when he hears this because he believes that Darius is about to scold them for entering the grounds without permission. Darius then walks up to them, telling them that he's known Glenn and his team for a long time. In fact, there is a portrait of him and the team on the wall. Darius mentions that he and the team have survived life or death situations together countless times, which is what has shaped them into what they are. Darius admits that he can never imagine losing them, and because they were able to save his friends, he has no choice but to thank them. Dak replies that things wouldn't have gotten worse the way they did if they had noticed the anomaly a little sooner, but Darius lets the two know that they did nothing wrong because it is his responsibility to have predicted the monster attack. Darius then asks them if they have heard the offer of the elite knights from Glenn, and he would like to know their answers once again. Colin is the first to speak, and he humbly rejects the offer. Darius asks Dak about his stance. Dak is completely overwhelmed by the offer, and he starts stuttering, talking about how there should be someone more capable. However, Colin cuts in, telling Dak that the head of the house is simply asking him what he wants, and Dak quickly screams out what he really wants, saying he would like to be one of the elite knights. Darius then tells Colin that he would like to hear his requests if he has any. Colin shocks both the Lord and Dak when he reveals that he would like Erica to be transferred back to the Hall estate from the Williams estate. Darius had to ask again, and Colin explained that Erica and Dak had always been together until they even came to the Hall family. Since Erica has a weak body, Colin says he is pretty sure that Dak wants his sister to be around him. Darius confirms if this is his wish, and Colin tells the man that he and Dak are comrades in arms who fought back to back, so they are close friends. Colin tells the Lord that he can't ignore Dak when he is in trouble. Dak is left speechless as Colin makes the strong wish that Erica be returned to Dak. Darius is moved by Colin's words as he addresses Dak as his close friend. Darius accepts his request, but tells him that it is going to take a bit of time because the Williams family is involved. After giving his assurance, Darius tells Dak that he can leave, and as he does, all he can think about is why Colin would go to that extent for him. Once they are alone, Darius tells Colin that the first time he saw him in the arena tanking a magic attack, he immediately figures out that Colin is no ordinary slave. However, he wasn't surprised back then until he saw him fight Freed. Darius says the power that Colin used isn't something that appears to be ordinary, and when Colin notices where Darius is going with this, he quickly cuts in. Colin lets Darius know that he is not an extraordinary person, and he displays his magic power, revealing that he is just someone who can use a little magic. Colin tells Darius that, from his perspective as a Grandmaster-level Great Mage, he is just a trivial existence. Darius finds it hard to believe, and he asks Colin who exactly he is, and Colin changes it up. He starts singing Darius's praise and tells him that he is pretty honored to have been noticed by someone like him. Colin pulls out his sword, saying his ideal is to realize Darius's ideal and eradicate bloodline supremacy from the world. He kneels in front of Darius, telling him that he would like to become great like him someday and even surpass him. Colin tells Darius that he has saved his life twice, and because of this, he would prove his strength and worth in the selection test. He assures Darius that however he uses him afterward is totally up to him. Darius almost blushes from everything Colin has said, but he manages to pull it in, and he tells Colin that he might leave. As he leaves, Darius asks Colin what he thinks about Rowan, but Colin is totally confused by the question. Seeing how ignorant he is about Rowan, Darius tells him not to worry about it and just leave. After his departure, Cornell, who has been concealed in the room, shows himself, and Darius asks him what he thinks of Colin, based on what he saw. Cornell tells Darius that Colin must be an incredible genius if he is truly an ordinary person. In addition, Cornell says Colin doesn't know Rowan from the way he reacted, which means he is not from the city of Ale. However, it is possible that he has some sort of ulterior motive, and they should remain vigilant. Cornell then informs Darius that a message arrived from the Spirit Cat moments earlier, and Darius is particularly curious about what the information contains. When Colin returns to his room, he realizes that Darius had helped him keep the spoils of the hunt, and thanks to this, he was able to exchange them for a large amount of supplies. With the number of supplies, Colin believes that his abilities would increase significantly. However, he is also concerned about Rowan's identity because the first time he heard the name was from Dak in his past life. Aside from his name, he knows nothing else, and Colin decides that he is going to ask Dak for more details later. Colin figures out that at the moment, gaining strength in preparation for the selection test is his priority. He dissolves a monster core in a tube and drinks it before activating the grimoire. Once the grimoire is active, Colin consumes more potions, and once he believes that he's had enough, he activates the absorption process. Mana burns through his body as if his veins are about to burst open. Moments later, the grimoire informs him that the absorption was successful, and his magical power has increased by 1 point. Colin realizes that mixing the wolf's cores with Jade Emperor grass can strengthen magical power. This is what was written in the grimoire, but even drinking the best quality medicine only decreased it by 3 points, and depending on the type, it didn't even increase it by 1 point. Colin realizes that he is going to go berserk just like the last time if his magic runs out again, and until he figures out how he can strengthen his magic resistance, he has no choice but to increase his magical power. Colin cooks up another potion and he almost dies from how awful the taste is. It soon dawns on him that drinking a bulk load of potion is not the way forward because his stomach might just burst before he achieves what he wants. This leaves him wondering if there is another way out. Suddenly, the system informs him that a powerful monster core has been detected, and he can create a magic tool using the Wolf King's monster core as material. Colin is surprised to learn that a monster core can be turned into a magic tool. Without hesitation, he dives into this, and by following the grimoire's instructions, he pours magic into the monster core, while picturing the shape of the magic tool in his mind. Once he has decided on what it should be, Colin generates the magic tool, and this gives off a bright golden light. Moments later, the system tells him that the magic tool generation is complete. Colin looks around and realizes that there is a bracelet on his left arm. The system calls the bracelet the Azure Bracelet, which is named after the wolves. The effect of the magic tool is to increase magical power by 1 point, and it also has a special effect, which is Wild Intuition. Colin doesn't fully understand the power of the bracelet, and he gulps down a potion to confirm the effect. This increases his magic power immediately, and he realizes that by using the bracelet, he can increase his magic points by 2 points instead of 1 point without too much stress. Colin is pleased to see this, and he concludes that magic tools are pretty convenient. However, he doesn't know what the special effect can do. He activates it, and to his surprise, he sees 2 maids outside the wall. He could see them clearly, like X-ray vision, and could even hear them. Colin is so stunned by this that he screams out in shock. He soon realizes that it is not X-ray vision, but a skill that allows him to see people's energy. He starts looking around, and he soon spots Darius and Katrina in their room. There is a section of their body that is oozing off mana, and this tells Colin that what he is looking at is magic. Suddenly, he hears a strange voice saying they are hungry. This gets Colin worried, and he looks around frantically, wondering where the strange voice is coming from.